Okay, we're recording.
Excellent, thank you. So welcome to the September 23rd, 2020 edition of the Oak Grove Community Council General Meeting. And my name is Joseph Edge, I'm the chair. And I'd like to give our board an opportunity to introduce themselves. And so I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves and the name of the street or neighborhood that they live in and what their role is on the board. And so for a moment, I'll stop sharing so we can see. So let's start with Valerie. Please introduce yourself and your neighborhood and your role.
Hi. Good evening. I'm Valerie Chapman. I'm the vice chair of the Oak Grove Community Council, and I live on Evergreen Street, just a block from the trolley trail.
Jane, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, my name is Jane Civiletti. I am the treasurer, and I live at the intersection of Oak Grove Boulevard and Fair Oaks Avenue. And Joseph, since I'm on now, shall I do the treasurer report?
We'll do it in just a minute.
Okay.
Jan, could you introduce yourself?
I am Jan Lindstrom. I am the secretary of the Community Council, and I live on Laurelwood, just below River Road.
Thank you. Jim, could you introduce yourself?
My name's Jim Meyer. I live on the corner of Oak Grove Boulevard and River Forest Drive.
And Greg, could you introduce yourself? Oh, you'll need to unmute yourself, please.
Greg Watson, Director at Large. I live on Oak Grove Boulevard between Laurie and Fair Oaks.
Excellent, thank you. So we're going to jump back into our slideshow. The next thing that we have up is our officer reports. And so I'd like to ask Jan, our secretary, to give us the report about the minutes and membership report, please.
All righty. Well, I did not type up minutes from the last meeting because we have Zoom, and so we are recording the minutes. However, I did want to bring that up, and I don't know when to bring that up, Joseph, but just to see if the membership would like to have just a record of like motions made or who was in attendance or something to have in there, even though we won't have the written out word by word. So that's just something I've been thinking about. In terms of membership, at our last meeting, we had, oops, sorry, I'm on this month. We had 22 voting members. We had 2 non-voting members, and we had 4 visitors or guests. And I'm going to be doing a complete sort of overhaul of the membership records because, as some of you may know, Joan Hamilton has sold her house. And she's been helping me with the attendance portion, and she won't be doing that any longer. And so that's, I'm a little behind. But I'm going to be redoing it, so hopefully it'll be easier.
Okay, thanks, Jan. Jane, could you provide the treasurer report, please?
Yes, the treasurer report is as follows. Our previous balance was $2,182.38. Today, we actually received an anonymous contribution in the amount of $30, bringing our balance to $2,212.38. Any contributions can be made at On Point Community Credit Union by going in and saying, I'd like to make a donation to the Oak Grove Community Council.
Awesome, thank you. So we are just a few minutes ahead of schedule, but I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Karen Burig, the long-range planning manager for the Clackamas County Planning Division. She's here to present about the Clackamas County Transit Development Plan that is underway. Karen.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me this evening. I'm actually here with Adrian Diadona. She works for Gene Lawson and Associates, so she's going to be helping kind of take notes of our conversation. So I do have a slideshow. So is it okay if I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes.
Right. See, I think I need to have it enabled.
I just put you as a co-host, Karen, that should do.
Excellent. Yes, I see it's going to work. All right. Well, perfect. So tonight I'm here to talk about and share about the Clackamas County Transit Development Plan. So this is a project that has been underway since about March of this year, and we are getting into the final stages of the Transit Development Plan. Let's see if I can figure out how to change the slides. Oops, here we go. Sorry about that. Let's see. I'm gonna go ahead and admit her. The Transit Development Plan, this is a new thing for Clackamas County. Up to this point, we have not had a Transit Development Plan. What we have had are transit policies within our Transportation System Plan. But with the advent of HB 2017 and the funding, which provided for funding for transit, and this funding came from an employee tax. So anyone who's an employee in Clackamas County is paying this tax. And so in order to have projects funded, they need to be in a plan. So there are areas of our county that, that don't currently exist within a transit provider. And so we wanted to make sure that we had areas throughout the county covered and that we thought holistically about transit in Clackamas County. So the primary purposes of this transit development plan is to identify connections where there is no service, to provide this coordinated vision for transit, and then identify those actions that we need to take in order to really allow people to use transit. When we looked at our approach, we actually are looking at two different study areas. One study area is the area within the TriMet district. And then the other study area specifically are the areas outside the TriMet district, but connecting between existing districts. As I noted, we started this project earlier this year. We put together a public engagement plan. We've undertaken a needs analysis, and currently we're at the place where we're identifying those future service opportunities and doing an evaluation of those future service opportunities. The map that's included here gives you an idea of the transit service in Clackamas County, or the providers. I know it's really small, but that orange area actually is the TriMet service district. But there are 7 transit providers in Clackamas County. So the big teal color is actually the South Clackamas Transportation District, and that's a transportation district around Malala. There's SMART with that serves Wilsonville. There's also Canby Area Transit, Sandy Area Transit, the Mount Hood Express that provides service all the way up to Timberline, and Clackamas Community College provides service in between their campus in Oregon City and their campus in Milwaukee. We do have a web page that talks about our transit development plan. So this is the link to that web page. And part of the reason I'm here tonight is I'm really here to encourage people to take a survey that's available about the transit development plan. But so just again, that quick overview, I kind of talked about the fact that we have these different transit providers. We're really unique here in Clackamas County. No other county has this many transit providers. And our rural cities really do a great job of providing transit service. But there are areas, and I'm just going to go back quickly to that map. The white areas are areas that don't have any transit service at all, or are not covered by a transit provider. So we do have service. You know, there are 56 fixed route buses. We do have park and ride facilities. There are also paratransit and nonprofit demand response services that serve Clackamas County. But then there are also other programs that complement the fixed route service, things like Get There Oregon or RideWise, different things like that. So we have a lot of different ways that people can get around the county. So for tonight, I was really going to focus on the TriMet area and the area around Oak Grove. So I just focused in on this map, and the orange lines are the existing TriMet service district lines. But you can see that they also do connect, and we do have these connections to our existing providers. So like the red lines are the service lines for Molalla, South County Transit District. Green is how Canby connects into Oregon City. The purple lines are SMART, the Wilsonville service. So there is the service that, that does exist within the county. But there are also places within this area. I'm just, as a host, going to admit these folks. I'm admitting people to your meeting. But one of the key things in our transportation system plan that had been identified is that there really, while we have north-south service for transit, we really don't have east-west service. So you can go into Portland, but how can you get across kind of the McLaughlin area? So as a part of this process, we really are looking at new connections. Where are places that don't have any transit service at all? What are places that might have transit service that need new local service? And then are there places that need additional transit service, kind of service in a different way? So those are a couple of the key needs that we have found. So these needs and the way that the transit needs have been identified, they have really looked at these new transit corridors, but they've also looked at service enhancements and ways that we can actually enhance the service that's there, and as well as provide more efficient service. Because really a goal is to not just encourage people, but have transit that makes people want to use it. I'll just put it that way. So coming out, and we have been working with a technical advisory committee as well as a project advisory committee. We've done quite a bit of analysis, and coming out of that really is a couple of key things. And I like this map because it's pretty simple. The green and blue lines are new service connections, connecting areas where we hadn't seen service before. And as you can see, kind of along the I-205 area, being able to connect over to the service that's provided by Wilsonville or into Tualatin is a really important connection. But some of those orange lines and orange connections are connections that are needed. They may have been identified in previous plans, but they don't exist. So we're really looking at those type of connections, especially in the Oak Grove and Jennings Lodge area. So this is a list of really the potential services that we're analyzing as a part of this process. So I won't go through the full list, but it really covers, it really covers the entire county. But a key part is that there's additional service that's needed in the Jennings Lodge, Oak Grove, and Oakfield area. So the type of service enhancements, I talked a little bit about new service in general, but service enhancements that may be needed are adding additional service early in the morning or later in the evening, adding weekend service, actually making the buses more frequent. One of the things in addition with regards to a general service enhancement is considering possibly bus on shoulder operations on freeways, where it's congested. Another thing that's really important, as I talked about having so many different providers, really improving the coordination between those providers so it's more seamless when you're coming from Molalla and needing to go, up to Oak Grove. How can you make that trip better? And then what types of information might people need, and tools that will really help the riders, such as real-time vehicle arrival and those type of things. So I wanted to touch just a little bit. So this is kind of getting into the details, and I'm focusing only here in the Oak Grove area, kind of Oak Grove, Jennings Lodge. I do want to say that if you are able to take the survey that we have available, it really provides you the opportunity to provide input on services throughout the whole county. But this is kind of this gives you a little window in to what the survey is asking about right now. So this particular service is a new service, and it would run along Jennings. It would pretty much connect the Oregon City Transit Center along Jennings and then into the Clackamas industrial area up to Happy Valley. This is a service that is already on the TriMet's what's called a service enhancement plan and has been identified for funding. But I did want to call out that it is a new service. So a place where there is no service right now, and there isn't service on a map, and so we're trying to get input from folks on how they think the best connection would be, is these are two different options of how to connect Oak Grove better to the Clackamas Town Center. So as you can see, the option on the north would go along Oak Grove Boulevard. I believe that's up along Thiessen and then just north and kind of swing over to Harmony. Whereas the lower one would take a more southern route and then sweep down by Johnson City to be able to connect to the industrial area before it went up to the Clackamas Town Center. All of these have to be kind of thought of in light of the other existing service and connections that might be out there. But this is one of the things that folks can comment on in the survey. Which type of service would you think is being more appropriate? So with that, we do have a survey that's available online. It just became live, I believe, today. I wonder if I can, if I want afterwards, I can probably put the link in the chat box, or I can send it to you. I don't know if it's better if I send things to you afterwards, Joseph, so that you can email these things out. But we're really interested in people's feedback.
We will absolutely send out a follow-up newsletter that will include the links to the survey as well as the plan page. That's great. And it will be open until October 15th. So we have about 3 weeks, I believe that is. So the next steps that we have is basically to have the survey, review the public feedback. We'll be taking that to our technical advisory committee and our public advisory committee. But we will really be, and from that, and that will happen in, I believe, late October, early November. And then we will be putting together the actual draft plan with hopefully with the intent of taking that draft plan and presenting it to the board in the early 2021. So that's our goal. So with that, I think that must be the end of my slideshow. And I'm here to answer any questions that you might have about this. Let me stop share. Thank you, Karen. Please feel free to use the raise hand feature if you want to ask questions, or wave at the camera if you need to, and we'll. Casey.
Hi. I'm just curious about any transit options between, say, Lake Oswego and Oak Grove, and if that's a potential. It looks like a lot of the stuff is connecting Oak Grove east, but I was just wondering if there's a way to connect those two. So during this process, we did not identify a new connection between Oak Grove and Lake Oswego. I'm trying to figure out, I do believe that there is recommendations for additional, more frequent service between Oregon City and Lake Oswego. I mean, right now, what a person would have to do, right, is either go down to Oregon City and then back up, or go up to Portland, or up that, I believe the 99 now goes over the Selwood Bridge, and then be able to transfer back to Lake Oswego.
So, but not a direct connection. That's not something. It's a comment you can make in the survey, though. Any other questions?
Are there more questions?
Commissioner Savas, did you?
You'll need to unmute Commissioner Savas.
I just have a comment, not really a question, and I appreciate Karen bringing this forward. This whole study was really born out of, as Karen kind of mentioned, the HB 2017 tax on employees for transit purposes. And when this committee was formed in 2018, as your representative, and there's another citizen of Clackamas County that's at the table, it's a very, it's populated with a lot of folks from Portland, as you can probably imagine. Some from Washington County and some from Clackamas County, but overwhelmingly the votes at the table there seem to be more Portland based. And what I tried to do there was to get the region to do a study like this to show where the gaps were, because so much of the TriMet service area where service is provided is predominantly in the city of Portland. And not much is in Clackamas County. So I've been fighting hard and advocating hard for transit prior to this and continuing on to do so. I appreciate Casey's question about Lake Oswego. We plan on bringing this to the cities. The cities have been, in Clackamas County, have been very concerned about the lack of transit in their city for their constituents as well. So this is something that's really been a big issue for us. And I think we'll be taking this up pretty seriously with the cities in the coming year, 2021. I want to plant one seed though, and that's really what my comment's really about. And that is that as we talk to TriMet, and TriMet's indicated that there's not likely to be any new service provided, really substantive service in the future, because there's just not much in the way of revenue. And by the way, Clackamas County, you really don't generate a lot of revenue. So I just want to just talk about the other factor. Karen mentioned employee tax for the HB 2017, but predominantly the money comes from employer taxes based on payroll. So our payroll is much smaller than Multnomah County's. So the seed I want to plant is that as the Clackamas County grows, we've basically are starting to run out of employment lands, job producing lands, which means we have less of a chance to produce high paying jobs. So in order to get more service or to create a new service, we're going to need a greater employment base. And we are a bedroom community that is lacking in jobs. We already have a jobs housing imbalance. The seed I want to plant is that we really need to think really long and hard about maintaining as much employment base as we can so we can get better transit service. Thank you. That's all I have.
Eleanor, I see your hand raised.
I'm struck, Karen, thank you so much for that presentation. I'm struck by the variety. You were saying like no other county has as many different types of transportation. And I'm just wondering, as somebody who used to live in large cities, like switching from one service to another service, to go from here to here, to change from this service to that service. Is there some sense, whether it's a survey or some sort of statistics of how many people take one service and then switch to another service, and that it's multiple types of transportation for one trip?
Right. So the consulting team did a lot of work and on being able to do different types of analysis. So I don't know if they actually had statistics on that specifically, but I do know that our smaller transit service providers, and those being Canby, Sandy, and Malala, some of their one of their primary parts of their service is bringing people into the Portland metropolitan area.
Right.
And so Sandy connects directly to the Gresham Transit Center. The city of Canby connects with the Oregon City Transit Center, and they know that their transit riders actually then switch services and go and use TriMet to come up to the city of Portland. So they're very, very keenly aware of that, and they've worked closely with TriMet as well as their partner agencies to match the service, right? So when they drop off, it's close to the time that the other buses pick up. But they do know that there are things, they don't have the same, they don't use the same app like the HOP app, or they don't have the same type of information services. So if you went down to the Oregon City Transit Center, where you can see the bus arrival times from TriMet, you're not necessarily seeing in the same way the bus arrival times for the Canby service. And those are type of things that have been identified as a need to be able to better meet that ability to make it more seamless.
To make more seamless. And also just to call out the fact that there's a huge economic issue here. You know, of people who are living far away without cars, who are taking public transportation, who are reliant on that. I mean, that's just to recognize the equity issues involved in transportation and the time issues of how long it takes some people to get to their employment, and what that does to the quality of life and the time they have with their families and everything else. So thank you, Commissioner Savas, for doing the work you're doing on transportation, because it's so interwoven with so many other things. So.
Thank you, Eleanor. Do we have any other questions?
So there was a question in the chat box. I'm sorry, my dog's barking because someone's outside. But I just thought that I would call that to everyone's attention. So Susan Keel had asked about how the needs were identified. And so with that, there is a needs memo that's included, and all of these different memos are on the website. But we really did look at where people worked, where they lived, and where they were going, where are the needs, where are people traveling. So that was one of the inputs that we looked at. We looked at how the existing services were being used. So for the existing service, what was the usage there? We also did some focus groups, went out and talked with folks. And we also had a survey, a previous survey that talked about needs and got that broader input. And I think that particular survey, over 700 people, is that right, Adrian? Or maybe it was more like 500, but we had a pretty good turnout.
It was over 700.
Yeah. So we had a lot of people respond to that survey and to help us identify what the needs were out there. So
awesome, thank you.
Yeah, if there are any more questions, that's great. I did put in the chat box the link to our the webpage, which will have a link. If it's not there tonight, Ellen must be working on putting it to make it live for tomorrow. So please participate. We love to hear from you, and just let me know if you need anything else.
Looks like Ellen has just joined us. Her ears must have been burning. We were just talking about having
we're probably posting the link to the survey, and if it wasn't live right now, it would be tomorrow. That's what I said.
It is live. It's up now.
Excellent. So we will we'll include this information in our follow-up newsletter email that we'll send out in the coming days, and we'll make sure that everyone has the links and the information to the project and the survey. So, thank you very much, Karen and Ellen, so briefly, for joining us. And again, if there's any questions, we'll have the contact information in our follow-up newsletter, or you can send an email to us at contact@oakgrovecco.org, and we'll make sure that your questions get passed along. So thank you both, and have a good evening. With that, we will return to our presentation. Oops.
Joseph, do you want me to just go ahead and start?
Yeah, sure, go ahead. I somehow lost my slideshow over here. So I'm going to turn it over to Valerie right now. And this is Segregated by Design, video and community conversation. So, Valerie, please take it away.
Okay, I just want to give a little introduction, and then Greg is going to help put it up, video for us. The video that we're going to watch is based on the book, The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. It's written by Richard Rothstein and was published in 2017. Richard Rothstein is an American historian and academic. His research focuses on the history of segregation in the United States, with regard in particular to education and housing. So he's a senior fellow at the Haas Institute at the University of California, Berkeley School of Law, a distinguished fellow of the Economic Policy Institute, and a senior fellow emeritus at the Thurgood Marshall Institute of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. He's also the author of many articles and books on race and education, which can be found at his webpage, which is at the Economic Policy Institute. So by watching this video together, it's the hope of the Oak Grove Community Council Board that we can continue the conversation in our community regarding inclusivity and diversity. So there will be a little bit of a time at the end for us to have a little bit of comments or questions, but with that, Greg, take it away. Greg, do you have the sound on?
I'm not hearing any sound, Greg.
Greg, the sound button is at the bottom to share sound on your Zoom screen. Joseph,
Greg, we're going to need you to start it over.
at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you need to share your sound.
Well, I'm not getting now what the hell happened.
You're partway through the video.
Yeah, well, I'm not, so my Zoom screen doesn't have anything anymore.
Okay, do you want to unshare and see if I can pull it up? Okay, just give me a second.
So I'm getting good sound personally, but I'm not sure why it's not coming through unless the closed captions. And the sound is all the way up on my,
You have the piece that says share computer sound.
yeah, it was, you know, it was working fine before. Microphone, same as system. Can you hear me still?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a mystery. Go, Jan. Up at the top of the box, English CC. No, right. Oh, there, you're almost there. Go, okay.
You hear that?
Hear it?
Yeah, sounds.
It just stopped.
In the middle of the 20th century, the city of St. Louis, Missouri, and the United States federal government condemned and demolished the neighborhoods in downtown St. Louis where African Americans lived, displacing thousands. They built the Gateway Arch. They built a university, interstate highways, hospitals, and middle-class housing that was unaffordable to the former African American residents. Those who were displaced then relocated to the few other places available, converting inner-ring suburbs like Ferguson into new segregated enclaves. We have been led to believe that racial segregation in housing was de facto segregation, by accident or the result of private prejudices. Yes, private prejudice clearly contributed to segregation, but by itself it could not have segregated the country without the intention of the federal government to segregate neighborhoods throughout the nation. If, however, we understand the accurate history, the history that was once well known but we've all now forgotten, that racially segregated patterns in every metropolitan area like St. Louis were created by de jure segregation, racially explicit policy on the part of federal, state, and local governments designed to segregate metropolitan areas, then we can understand that we have an unconstitutional residential landscape. And if it's unconstitutional, then we have an obligation to remedy it. The federal government in the New Deal of the Roosevelt administration of the 1930s pursued policies in the mid-20th century that segregated metropolitan areas. One important policy was the first civilian public housing program, which frequently demolished integrated neighborhoods in order to create segregated public housing. In the late 1930s, another New Deal program, the United States Housing Authority, was adopted. The very first projects built under the United States Housing Authority authorization were in Austin, Texas, because the most aggressive proponent of public housing at that time was the congressman from Austin, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And Johnson got the United States Housing Authority to put its first projects in Austin, separate projects for whites, for African Americans, and the project for Hispanics. The project for African Americans was placed in a location that the city plan of Austin had designated as a ghetto for African Americans. The United States Housing Authority and the local Austin Housing Authority demolished something called Emancipation Park, which was a celebrations location for the abolition of slavery. The design was to move all African Americans in the city of Austin into this community, whether in public housing or in private housing. The city of Austin then began to close schools for African Americans elsewhere in the city and close libraries and other public facilities to force African Americans to move to the east side. Another program that the federal government pursued to enforce segregation was the work of the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, which subsidized the development of suburbs like Levittown, New York, on condition that they only be sold to white families and that the homes in those suburbs had deeds that prohibited resale to African Americans. The Federal Housing Administration's underwriting manual said that inharmonious racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities, meaning that loans to African Americans could not be insured. Government at all levels throughout the nation were involved in promoting and enforcing the restrictive deeds in homes and places like Levittown, and judges enforced the view that these deeds did not violate the Constitution because they were private agreements. Although white middle-class families that moved into suburbs like Levittown could buy property with no down payments if they were veterans and low-interest mortgages, middle-class African Americans had to make substantial down payments and get uninsured mortgages with higher interest rates. In many, if not most cases, African Americans could not get mortgages at all because the federal government would not insure them. As a result, they bought their homes on contract, like an installment plan where they accumulated no equity and could be evicted from their homes in the event of a single missed payment. Thus, contract buyers do not have the option of leaving a declining neighborhood before their properties were paid for in full. If they did, they would lose everything they'd invested in that property to date. The term redlining comes from the federal government's creation of maps of urban areas nationwide. And those maps were color-coded to indicate where it was safe to insure mortgages. Anywhere African Americans lived, even places where African Americans lived nearby, were colored red to indicate to appraisers that these neighborhoods were too risky for the FHA to insure. The FHA's justification was that if African Americans bought homes in white neighborhoods, or even if they bought homes near those neighborhoods, the property values of the homes they were insuring, the white homes they were insuring, would decline, and therefore their loans would be at risk. In 1940, for example, a Detroit builder was denied FHA insurance for a project that was near an African American neighborhood. He then constructed a half-mile concrete wall, 6 feet high and a foot thick, separating the two neighborhoods, and then the FHA approved the loan. In the 3 decades during which it administered this policy, however, the agency never provided or obtained evidence to support its claim that integration undermined property values. In fact, often racial integration caused property values to increase because African Americans' housing supply was so restricted and they had so many fewer choices. If African Americans had access to housing throughout metropolitan areas, supply and demand balances would have kept their rents and home prices at reasonable levels. Without access, landlords and sellers were free to take advantage of the greater demand relative to supply for African American housing. A 1946 National Magazine article described a Chicago building where the landlord had divided a 540-square-foot storefront into 6 cubicles, each housing a family. He had similarly subdivided the second story. Total monthly rent was as great as that generated by a luxury apartment on Chicago's Gold Coast along Lake Michigan. Such exploitation was possible only because public policy denied African Americans opportunities to participate in the city's white housing market. As the federal government concentrated low-income African Americans in single neighborhoods, the homes became overcrowded. Families had to subdivide their homes to make their mortgage payments or their property tax payments. Cities frequently withdrew public services from African American neighborhoods. They collected garbage less frequently. They didn't provide water and sewer services. Polluting industry and toxic waste plants were placed in African American communities in order to protect white neighborhoods from deterioration. The result was that African American neighborhoods frequently turned into slums. White homeowners looked at these places and assumed that slum conditions were characteristics of African Americans, not of government policy that forced this kind of overcrowding. White homeowners then became resistant to African Americans moving into their neighborhoods because they thought they would bring slum conditions with them. Of course, the slums were not created by the people. They were created by the forced concentration, the overcrowding in these neighborhoods. Blockbusting was a scheme in which speculators bought properties in borderline black-white areas, rented or sold them to African American families at above-market prices, persuaded white families residing in these areas that their neighborhoods were turning into African American slums and that values would soon fall precipitously, and then purchased the panicked white homes for less than their worth. Blockbusters' tactics included hiring African American women to push carriages with their babies through white neighborhoods, hiring African American men to drive cars with radios blasting through white neighborhoods, or making random telephone calls to residents of white neighborhoods and asking to speak to someone with a stereotypically African American name, like Johnny May. State licensing agencies that regulated real estate agents could have easily stopped this practice. All they had to do was to lift the license of 1 or 2 real estate agents who engaged in these practices, and the practices would have ended. While many de jure segregation policies aim to keep African Americans far from white residential areas, public officials also shifted African American populations away from downtown business districts so that white commuters, shoppers, and business elites would not be exposed to black people. This was accomplished with slum clearance. One slum clearance tool was the construction of the federal interstate highway system. in many cases state and local governments, with federal acquiescence, designed interstate highway routes to destroy urban African American communities. In the 1950s, there was a white middle-class neighborhood in Los Angeles that wealthy African Americans began to move into. It was called Sugar Hill. The first thing that happened was that the neighborhood association got together and tried to buy out the African American families who were moving in, offering them more money than the African Americans had paid in order to get them out of the neighborhood. When that didn't work, white homeowners tried to enforce a legal agreement prohibiting them from living in the neighborhood. And when that didn't work, the city council then decided it would be an African American neighborhood. It rezoned it for multiple family housing. It eventually became a slum. And then the Santa Monica Freeway was built to clear that slum to destroy the neighborhood. So these policies all work together in an unconstitutional fashion to segregate Los Angeles. In 1957, Bill and Daisy Myers were able to purchase a home in Levittown, Pennsylvania, the Levitt Company's second large development. When the mail carrier discovered that he was delivering mail to an African-American family, he let everyone in the neighborhood know, and as many as 600 white demonstrators soon showed up in front of the Myers' house, pelting the family and their home with rocks. Law enforcement stood by as this happened. For 2 months, rocks were thrown, crosses were burned, the Ku Klux Klan symbol was painted on the wall next door. Some policemen stood with the mob, joking and encouraging its participants. One sergeant was actually demoted to patrolman because he objected to orders he had been given not to interfere with the rioters. In 1951, World War II veteran Harvey Clark, his wife Janetta, and 2 small children rented an apartment in all-white Cicero, a suburb of Chicago. When the Clarks refused to leave, a mob of 4,000 rioted, raiding the apartment, destroying the fixtures, and throwing the family's belongings out the window onto the lawn where they were set ablaze. Time magazine reported that the police officers present, quote, acted like ushers politely handling the overflow at a football stadium, unquote. The only people at the grand jury indicted were Harvey Clark, his real estate agent, his NAACP attorney, and the white landlady who rented the apartment to him, as well as her attorney, on charges of inciting a riot and conspiring to lower property values. Stories like this were commonplace, and state-sponsored violence was a means, along with many others, by which all levels of government maintained segregation. Today, African American incomes are about 60% of white incomes. But African American wealth is about 10% of white wealth. Most middle-class families in this country gain their wealth from the equity they have in their homes. So this enormous difference between a 60% income ratio and a 10% wealth ratio is almost entirely attributable to federal housing policy implemented through the 20th century. African American families that were prohibited from buying homes in the suburbs in the 1940s and 50s, and even into the 60s by the Federal Housing Administration, gained none of the equity appreciation that whites gained. Across the country in new developments, these homes in the late 1940s and 1950s sold for about twice national median income. They were affordable to working-class families with an FHA or VA mortgage. African Americans were equally able to afford those homes as whites, but were prohibited from buying them. Today, those homes sell for $300,000 to $400,000 at the minimum, 6 to 8 times national median income. The white families sent their children to college with the wealth they gained from appreciating home equity. They were able to take care of their parents in old age and not depend on their children. They were able to bequeath wealth to their children. None of those advantages accrued to African Americans who, for the most part, were prohibited from buying homes in those suburbs. So in 1968, we passed the Fair Housing Act that said, in effect, okay, African Americans, you're now free to buy homes in the suburbs that had been forbidden. But it's an empty promise, because those homes are no longer affordable to the families whose parents or grandparents could have afforded them when whites were buying into those suburbs and gaining the equity and wealth that followed from their purchases. Consider children who come from families where they're economically stressed, or in poor health because they have no access to good health care, or because they live in polluted environments. When they do come to school, for example, they may suffer from asthma because of that pollution and are drowsy from being awake at night, wheezing. They cannot then typically achieve at levels of children who come to school well rested. When you concentrate children like that in single classrooms, it's impossible for teachers to develop the kind of outcomes that they can in middle-class children who come to school healthy, unstressed, and able to pay attention to schooling. What economists know is that African American children from low-income families who grow up in segregated neighborhoods are less likely as adults to move into the middle class than are African American children whose families have the same low incomes but who live in integrated neighborhoods. So segregation itself impedes intergenerational mobility and perpetuates, rigidifies the inequality that we experience. Another thing that social psychologists have discovered is that decision-making is hampered when you don't have diverse decision-making groups. These psychologists have done experiments where they put people together to solve problems in both diverse groups and in segregated groups. And the diverse groups are much better able to solve problems because they challenge assumptions much more than the segregated groups do. So segregation impedes our political and economic success. We have 3 provisions in the federal Constitution that prohibit the kinds of actions that federal, state, and local governments pursued to create residential segregation. One is the Fifth Amendment, which requires the federal government to treat all citizens fairly. Another is the 14th Amendment that requires state and local governments not only to treat citizens fairly, but to treat them equally. And then the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, also requires that we banish the effects of slavery, which Congress long ago determined was any form of second-class citizenship. So in fact, the prohibition on African Americans to purchase homes in federally subsidized white communities or the segregation of public housing created a form of second-class citizenship which was a violation of the 13th Amendment. We cannot reverse de jure segregation mainly with lawsuits. We must also build a national political consensus leading to legislation, a challenging but not impossible task. Our focus now should be to develop policies that promote an integrated society, understanding it will be impossible to fully untangle the web of unconstitutional inequality that we've woven. To begin, we should first contemplate what we have collectively done and, on behalf of our government, accept responsibility to fix it.
Instead of playing the credits, we'll just use up more of our time. I want to invite people, if you have comments or thoughts that you would like to share about anything perhaps that surprised or challenged you, about what you already knew about about residential housing. And I see that Eleanor's hand is up. No?
She was applauding.
I was applauding.
Oh, okay.
I'm really grateful for you guys for bringing this. I know this is the second time you've brought presentations on this, and I'm really, really grateful for you guys to be presented this stuff. I think that was a really great, just painful synopsis of things. So thank you for bringing it to everybody's attention. So like, pull our heads out of the sand, everyone. Yep. So.
Are there other questions or thoughts that people had that they would like to make? I see Commissioner Savis's hand is up.
Yeah, I just want to say that if you were to read the book Color of Law and follow it up with How to Kill a City, the author of How to Kill a City, I can't remember his first name, last name's Moskowitz. The suggestion there in the modern day of redlining is the suggestion. And I would say that apparently it seems to be true, especially, and there's examples of 4 or 5 metropolitan areas around the country. And that is, its urban renewal was a means of economically displacing people. And now also the more urban design and transportation-oriented development designs where economically people are being displaced and they're more hipster-like. The word hipster is used repeatedly through the book, but it's not all about hipsters. But I would just encourage people to follow up with that book as well, to get a better idea of how and what that looks like in modern day. In Los Angeles and in the Bay Area, I've done a lot of research how those areas have been dealing with this. They are about 2 to 3, 4 years ahead of Portland in the sense of acknowledging, recognizing what causes it and how they're trying to cope with it. The African American community and the Hispanic community especially are very anti-government, anti-city, because they have continually in the recent decades been displaced and displaced and displaced economically, not by the means of which this video is. So in the modern day, it still happens. And if you can't afford to live somewhere, you can't afford to live somewhere. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. If nothing else, a conversation starter. Thank you.
Okay. Are there other people that might have a comment or a thought? Perhaps housing in Oregon was segregated using several of those strategies. And as the commissioner says, although some of those strategies are illegal, we are the recipients of a community that is actually a state that's pretty segregated based on past policies. So I'm wondering if other people might have an experience that they want to share, or
Valerie.
Susan?
Can you hear me? This is Thelma.
Okay, Thelma. And then we'll go to Susan.
One of the things that I'm very aware of that started all of this way back when was the tool that government always touts, that it's the only tool they have, called urban renewal. And urban renewal in downtown Portland was what destroyed all of the homes on the south side of Market Street and put up the high-rise business apartments and businesses down there. It's also what displaced a lot of places, like the town center, of course, took urban renewal. It was one of the reasons that I fought urban renewal going in our area on the Park Avenue situation when it came up a few years back.
Thank you, Thelma. Susan? Consider?
I think I've brought it up before, but they talked about Levittown having those underlying covenants. And just as a reminder, here in Oak Grove, at least the property we have and about 200 houses. Whoops, I think this Jim and I are in the same room. It's kind of, there are about 200 homes who had to sign, the people who own those had to sign that covenant stating that no non-Caucasian people could actually live here unless they were domestic servants of the Caucasian people. So I have tried to do something to get that eliminated. I mean, it's definitely superseded by anti-discrimination laws, but I still feel so uncomfortable having that at the base of the deed of my house, and that the only reason that it can't be implemented is because of our anti-discrimination laws. The county can't help with it because it's a privately held covenant. And it's just a distressing subconscious problem. I know that's more important to work on the more conscious and out there problems, but just as a reminder that that's still there.
Thank you. So I see Jan and Eleanor also.
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. I just, to follow up on what Susan just said, I remember reading an article in the Oregonian about a legislator who was working on this issue in Salem and trying to make some kind of blanket way to easily get rid of these covenants that are in there or something. It becomes difficult because it's, individual people and there's a cost associated with it and other things. Obviously with wildfires and pandemics and economic issues, it's probably not 100% everyone's top priority to go in and figure out how to pay to wipe these out. But I had some kind of a crazy thought, which is, what if, you know, we just committed as a CPO, as a start, to those of you who are homeowners to just go and look at your deed. I don't even remember reading mine, to see if it has a covenant in it. And then if it does, to identify it, to find out the process for having that removed and gotten rid of and altered. And then could we set up some kind of fair housing fund where the county commits and we commit to saying, yes, I'll pay the $62 it costs, you know, for me to unwhite privilege my property. But I want it to go into this housing fund that the county will then match, and hopefully the county can then get state or federal funds to do that. And it can be something where we're undoing it, and we as individual citizens and also the government, we could incentivize people by having a match. Just a thought. I don't know how Paul feels or how that would work.
Okay. Thank you, Jan. And Eleanor had her hand up.
I had my hand up after Commissioner Savis's comment about, you know, if you can't afford to live where you can't afford to live, and how that ties back into the whole transportation issue. And so it's another way of, if people can't live close to their jobs, you know, how that exacerbates the whole thing. So how intrinsically all of this is tied together. And it isn't just sort of like, housing isn't a separate thing as this video showed. It's all of these different ways in which it all fits together. And so the idea of where our employment lands, where are those things? How do we structure this? And so in the same way that there was a cabal, if you will, of like, here's how we're going to do this. It's the same sort of things, like everybody who participates in policymaking, how do we do this a different way? It isn't how we undo what's been done. How do we do it a different way to move forward instead of going backwards, as far as I'm concerned. So.
Well, I don't see any other hands up, and I want to thank everybody for making comments and for sitting through the video. I think that we can put the video link on with our newsletter as it goes out, and encourage other people to. And we're kind of over our time on our agenda for this tonight, but again, it's something for us to continue thinking about, and the process of, you know, making our community more diverse and inclusive, and the barriers that have been there. So thank you.
Thank you so much for this, Valerie. I've read both the books that Commissioner Savis mentioned, and they are both really informative, you know, with through different lenses. And so I definitely encourage anybody who's interested in the topics to read both of those books, you know, for, you know, a well-rounded, you know, perspective on, you know, on some of these issues that contribute to both economic and racial segregation. So thanks to everybody for your comments tonight, and thank you, Valerie, for bringing this video to share with everyone. I think it's fantastic. So with that, I'm going to get back into our presentation. Just very briefly, we're going to give, we are kind of running behind, as Valerie mentioned, and so we're going to skip ahead pretty quick, but I did want to make sure that everyone knew that bakeries and brew pubs have in fact been legalized in the commercial districts. On September 10th, the Board of County Commissioners formally adopted the resolution making the amendments, or adopting the amendments to the Zoning and Development Ordinance, and that will take effect on October 1st. So it's really exciting news, and we're really happy to see that come to fruition for us. So we are still working on housing strategies projects for the county, and we'll have more updates for you probably next month on that. And then also we're going to be, we're continuing to solicit ideas from the community for requests to pass along for the long range planning work program requests that we'll submit closer to the end of the year. And just as an example, the bakeries and brew pubs request was, one of these previous requests in a couple of different, a couple recent years for us. And that turned out really well. The Park Avenue Community Project that we'll hear about in just a moment is another one of those. And so this is a great opportunity to try to work in our community's priorities into the county's budget. So with that, I'd like to give Jan Lindstrom, our Concord Property and Library Planning Task Force member, an opportunity to give us an update on that process. And I understand we have, you are muted, Jan.
Oh,
and
there.
I understand we have another member from the task force in attendance tonight as well.
Yes, we do. And I was actually going to introduce him. Mark, where'd you go? Mark Elliott? Hey, Mark. Just wanted to introduce you. Mark is, and you're muted. Maybe I can ask to unmute you. There we go.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Oh.
Mark is also, are you unmuted? Mark is also a Concord Task Force member and just sent a note to me saying, hey, I'm part of the Oak Grove Community Council and I want to know more about it and all that good stuff. So welcome. And I'm just going to give a brief summary, and Mark, you're welcome to add something to it. Basically, we were supposed to have our meeting, was it last week or the week before? I think it was last week. In the midst of the fires, it was canceled. And so I thought I would have an update for you because we were going to be reviewing the final design plan and giving input and hopefully becoming unanimously excited about it. But the meeting is on hold until this Thursday. Is that right, Mark?
Yes, the meeting is tomorrow night, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, that's tomorrow already. Yes, it is. So if anyone is interested in attending that meeting, they can go on the county's website and there is a link on there for Concord Property Task Force meetings and can join in on the Zoom meeting. But it's exciting that we're boiling it down to the final design and, there will be obvious iterations of the design as it goes forward into greater detail and planning. This is just the basic superstructure design, but they were supposed to come back with a bunch of refinements based on feedback. And so we'll be seeing that and that will be exciting. And then I would be happy to report at the following meeting.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for that update. It was nice to meet you, Mark.
Thank you.
We hope to see you again in the future. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Valerie again to provide an update on the Park Avenue Community Project.
Okay, well, we're in the final stage of the work with the Park Avenue Community Advisory Committee. Currently, we have online, and we'll send that as part of the newsletter again. We had a workshop on the 16th. Last Wednesday, and that is recorded and can be seen on the county website. And what we're working on right now is to create the zoning and design standards that will reflect the work that we have done around community priorities and our draft framework plan. In order for any of that planning, that our hopes and dreams for this area to be put into place. First of all, the design and zoning standards have to allow for that. And that's the project that we're working on right now. So there is a survey online. And right now, the surveys are a primary way of getting input from our community. So we really hope that you will take the time to go on and fill that survey out. And also to encourage friends and people who live, especially people who live in the area around the Park Avenue to go online and to do that survey. So the hope is then there'll be one more Park Avenue Advisory Committee meeting. And then we hope to present the kind of completed plan to the Board of County Commissioners sometime in October or early November. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. It's nice to see that project moving into its final stages. And so that next Zoom meeting is October 14th. Is that correct, Valerie? I didn't see if you had given a thumbs up for that. Is October 14th the next? Yes. Okay, perfect. So October 14th will be the next Zoom meeting of the Park Avenue Community Advisory Committee. However, the web survey is online now, and we'll make sure that we get that link out in our follow-up newsletter in the next couple of days. One more update, the North Clackamas Watersheds Council, Get to Know Your Watersheds virtual open house event, or virtual workshop, sorry. It was rescheduled. It was originally for next Wednesday, but due to some requests, popular requests, we are moving that back a week to Wednesday, October 7th. And so we'll be in our follow-up newsletter as well. 2 open advisory boards and commissions that the county is recruiting for right now, the Board of Property Tax Appeals and the Vector Control District. We will include these as well in our follow-up newsletter. And with that, I'd like to open up to the floor the opportunity to make any announcement.
Hello, this is Fred. I have a question.
Go for it.
This is probably for Thelma or Valerie or others. Last year, the Elks announced that they were beginning the process of redeveloping their property. Is that still ongoing? And the second question, last year, the credit union bought the old Safeway and was planning to redevelop it. Is that still ongoing, or has the pandemic put those 2 projects on hold?
Fred, I could mention that Lee Kell, who is a member of the Elks Lodge, is also a member of the Park Avenue Community Advisory Committee. So Thelma may have other information to add to that, but I do know that they're working on that project and that they are in communication both with the county with a Park Avenue plan. So they have been a participant there in their project. I don't know anything about the Safeway.
The Safeway, permits were approved, and so they have a couple of years before they need to do anything, in response to those. I haven't heard any specific information or rumors about plans changing for that site, but land use permits are pretty long scale, and so they'll have 2 years to begin substantial implementation of what was permitted before they'll need to seek an extension. So
And that's the
it'll be a while before we hear about that.
And that's
Yeah, it's the Clackamas Federal Credit Union headquarters. Yeah, and the old Safeway Food for Less building. Any other announcements from the floor? Casey.
Yeah, I just have a question. I'm wondering if you guys have heard anything about Halloween, and if there's any information about how that may transpire this year, if there's any differences in that, if there's anything consideration from this group about that and going about it. Just curious.
I haven't heard any information from any of my sources about anything different, or anything specific about Halloween or Halloween safety or anything. Obviously, it's a completely different environment than any other Halloween we've had for at least a century. So, it's Eleanor, did you have something on that?
Well, I know in the past in this neighborhood, the United Methodist Church has done a knock and treat for kids, that different people decorate doors and the kids can go in one place out of the rain and do things. I doubt that they're going to be doing something this year. I don't know that for sure. I know that the church is housing a number of our neighbors who are currently without homes. And I think with COVID, that might cut down on the ability to do knock and treat one way or the other. I know that is what's been done in the past. I don't know for sure from the church if they're going to do it or not, but that would be one place to think about. That's what they've done it before. Valerie?
I was just going to say too, we have a meeting before Halloween, so maybe we'll have we have the opportunity to do some research, and if anybody hears anything, I know I just recently saw an article, and I'm sorry, I don't remember where I was reading it, but it was talking about Halloween safety and changing the way we do things. So maybe we can research and get that out to people. Yeah.
That sounds good. Commissioner Stavis.
I will raise this tomorrow. Tomorrow morning at our business meeting, we have our weekly report from our staff and Dr. Present. I'll pose that question. What I'm hearing on my side of the world is they're not advising much in the way of any contact, and children may not be as much at risk, but their parents and grandparents and others are, and so they can transmit that COVID. So I kind of wonder, frankly, if 2020 is not really the trick or treat of the century. So, I will report back, or if anyone wants to watch the business meeting and see what the doctor's response is, just tune into that meeting or the recording of it.
Excellent. Thank you for doing that. Any other questions or announcements from Jan?
I'm just going to say, Casey and Thelma and other friends of the trolley trail, that, you know, I don't think a single file 6-foot distance Halloween parade with little kiddies single file down the trolley trail as we stand with battery lit candles on the side and pelt them with candy that we, you know, scoop with a safe scoop. Commissioner Savas has got like the throwing arm for the candy from all those parades. We won't knock any kids out. We'll be gentle. It's just a thought.
So my understanding, there's a whole idea of like having a 6-foot tube, you know, that you can like have on your railing or something and, you know, do that. So there's all sorts of amazing creative things. That's the one thing about Homo sapiens. We're resilient and creative and adaptable. Who knows?
We can just figure out an average foot count per, you know, anybody ever marched in a parade, you know, you did one and then somebody just stands there and they let the next group go. They wait for the 6 feet and then they go. You know, you have a little guard at the door.
Joseph, can you hear me?
I can, Thelma. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to give an update to everybody on Fred's question about the Elks Lodge. There is a committee of Elks members, 5 of us, who have taken on this project. We have a contract with an outfit known as Retirement Housing Foundation, based out of Long Beach, California. And we are working definitely. I think we've had some designs drawn up for the first phase of the redevelopment of our property. We have nothing firm on this, but we met this afternoon, and the plan will start out with phase 1 as to have a facility where the annex is on the back side, the west side of the Elks Lodge. One of the key elements we're doing is not to hide the lodge from McLaughlin, but to actually enhance the vision of the lodge from McLaughlin, so the backside of the lodge property can handle a taller building, and we're working on the designs that they've put out with the Park Avenue stuff, and this is all moving forward. It's going very slow, small steps at a time, but we are working on it, Fred. And anytime any of you have any questions about what's going on, just feel free to give me a holler.
Excellent. Thank you, Thelma. Last call for any more announcements from the floor. Nate, I see your hand.
Yeah, hi. Really quick, I think Jan just mentioned the Trolley Trail people. I just wanted to say to all the Trolley Trail folks out there, thank you so much for the bike racks and repair station on Oak Grove Boulevard. We live a couple blocks away from it, and my family and I actually moved out here from Portland because the Trolley Trail was we were able to. I'm able to commute into Portland on my bike every single day, so to see that was awesome. Thank you folks so much for that. And I'm gonna put my email in the chat. If any of the Trolley Trail people need help with anything in the future, please reach out to me.
And that's also historic downtown Oak Grove, or known as H-Dog,
right,
who I think really work with the county to get those beautiful bike racks and that fabulous bike repair station there. So Trolley Trail had something to do with it, but I think mainly those items were with the historic downtown Oak Grove organization in that area there. So compliments all around, because they wouldn't be there without the Trolley Trail. So synergistic wonders. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it was really fun to see those installed finally. As a member of the Clackamas County Pedestrian and Bikeway Advisory Committee, I've been involved in this project as well, and we helped with the grant and everything to get. And these are actually this is really the first bicycle parking in the public right of way in Clackamas County, and so it's actually kind of unique. For anywhere in the county, let alone and not just the urban area, but for the whole county. So it's really cool to see those go in, and they look really cool too.
And they're really beautiful. I mean, they're really, really beautiful. Something to be really proud of.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your comments on those. And I think with that, I'll put up our upcoming schedule. Oh wait, do I see another hand raised? No, that was me. So let's see. Upcoming meetings. We have another board meeting coming up on October 5th and Monday, October 5th, and we'll be using that time to plan for our October 28th meeting, where we'll see all of you again. So looking forward to that. And then just to note that our next meeting after that will not be the day before Thanksgiving. It will be the following week, Wednesday, December 2nd. And that will be the combined November-December meeting to close out the year. And then I see Eleanor with her hand raised.
I have a question. If someone wants to participate in the board meetings, how do they go about doing that? How do you get on that invite list, or how do you get the Zoom invitation to participate in a board meeting?
That is an excellent question. I guess the best way to do that would be to contact us at contact@oakgrovecpo.org.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't traditionally sent out the links to the board meetings to our full email list due to less interest in those meetings, but certainly if you have an interest in attending one of the board meetings, please reach out to us specifically, and we'll make sure that we get you those invitations with the links. And if we start seeing more interest in those meetings, we might start sending them out proactively.
Well, and I asked because if someone wants to become a voting member of the Oak Grove Community Council, I believe that attending a board meeting counts towards the 5 meetings that one has to attend in order to become a voting member. Check me on that if I'm wrong, Jan, but I think that if you attend the regular monthly meetings and you attend board meetings, you can rack up your 5 necessary meetings to become a voting member. So just wanting people to know how they can attend the board meetings as well. So. Yeah,
I don't think that's in the bylaws, but I don't know that much of the actual attendance taking is in the bylaws. So that's something that since we're reconsidering all of this, we should take a look at that or add it in.
Yeah.
I remember that from the past. I'm just, and again, I checking memory here, but that's
well, makes sense.
Yeah. Because it's showing interest and involvement in the organization. So.
And hopefully learning more about the community.
There you go. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. And with that, we are done. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. It's great to see everybody again. Really happy to bring these topics up to your attention. And if anyone has any questions about anything, please feel free to email us. Contact@oakgrovecpo.org is the best way to reach us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.